like your home is safe. Locked doors, snow outside, a quiet street. I thought the same. But sometimes, safety is just a fragile illusion. My name is Cameron. I lived in a small, suburban house at the far end of a quiet neighborhood. Winter had settled early this year, coating streets, lawns, and rooftops in thick, undisturbed snow. My house, cozy and cluttered with small personal touches, felt like a safe bubble. Hardwood floors, carpeted bedroom, small rugs that always seemed to reveal too much. They were all familiar, comfortable. I woke early that morning. The world outside was pristine and silent. Snow muffled everything: traffic, birds, even the occasional distant hum of a generator. I made coffee and settled near the window, watching the first faint sunlight glint off the white rooftops. I had checked the locks the night before, every door and window. Nothing could get in, or so I thought. A lingering sense of unease had followed me the past week, though I couldn't name why. Perhaps it was the news reports, a string of burglaries in quiet neighborhoods, all targeting early morning homes. Perhaps it was the lingering stress of living alone. Whatever it was, I brushed it off, until the footprints appeared. I noticed them as I opened the front door to shake off snow from my boots. The fresh snow outside had been untouched, except for one set of footprints leading directly to my entrance. Confused, I followed the prints inside. They shimmered faintly on the hardwood floor, the melted snow leaving tiny wet trails. My heart skipped. Impossible, I muttered. I locked everything. The prints led straight down the small hallway toward my bedroom, the carpet showing wet imprints, dark and slightly warm. I bent closer, tracing the path with my eyes. The rug, usually comforting underfoot, now felt like a trap, a record of someone walking through my home without struggle, without leaving a single clue of forced entry. I checked the locks, every window, every door, every bolt, secure. Nothing had been tampered with, and yet the footprints hadn't been there when I went to bed. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening. The house was silent, no creak of stairs, no rustle of fabric, no whisper of a shadow. Only my own heartbeat, thudding painfully loud, and the faint, soft drip of melting snow from the front door. I tried to convince myself it was a trick. Perhaps I had imagined them. Perhaps a dream had spilled over into reality. But as I leaned down to inspect the carpet, I felt something chilling. The prints were warm. Someone had walked here recently, and they had walked straight to me. Fear clawed at my chest. I paced the bedroom, listening for any sign of movement. Every shadow seemed heavier, every corner darker. I reached for my phone, no signal. I grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the room. Nothing. Then I heard it, a faint squelching sound, wet footsteps on the carpet. Behind me, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I spun. Nothing. The room was empty. I checked every closet, every corner, even under the bed. Empty. But the footprints told a different story. They had paused in the center of the bedroom, right where I had been sitting. And now they were closer to the bed. Panic surged. I realized I hadn't locked my bedroom door that night. But that didn't explain the rest. No sign of forced entry. No broken windows. No alarm triggered. Only the footprints. And the growing certainty that someone or something had been here and had left them deliberately. I tried to scream, but my voice caught. I felt watched. I felt the pressure of eyes on me, even though I saw nothing. My hands shook as I picked up a nearby lamp like a weapon. Every sense screamed at me, run, hide, flee. But flee to where? The house itself felt like a trap. I installed a motion-activated camera that night. I checked and rechecked it, convinced I would catch some intruder. But the next morning, the footprints were back, slightly shifted, closer to the bed. I called the police. They examined the house for forced entry. None. No fingerprints. No footprints outside beyond the snow I had already seen. They suggested stress, paranoia, perhaps a hallucination. But I knew the truth. Every night, I replayed the steps in my mind. Every lock, every window, every bolt. How could someone have entered, moved through the house undetected, and left without a trace? The thought obsessed me. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, checking constantly, pacing the halls, listening for footsteps that never came, but sometimes felt like they were just behind me. Eventually, I moved out. Sold the house quickly, almost blindly, unable to face that space any longer. But even now, the memory lingers. I still dream of the footprints, always leading straight to me. Sometimes in snow, sometimes on carpet, sometimes in wet sand, always precise. Always warm, always too close. I haven't lived in silence since. Every creak, every drip, every soft shuffle of fabric makes me tense. And sometimes, in the quiet, I swear I hear the faint, wet squelching of footsteps, pacing toward me. Even in my new home, I never feel safe, never fully alone. I still dream of the footprints, always leading straight to me. The snowstorm outside made everything silent, except the knocks. Slow, patient, deliberate. They were not part of the house, they were alive. I cannot explain them. I cannot ignore them. This is what happened to me in the middle of a blizzard, in a small, isolated cabin, with no one around. Listen carefully, and imagine being trapped where you should feel safe. The first night was deceptively calm. I had arrived at the cabin around sunset, hauling groceries and supplies through waist-high snow drifts. The road had been nearly impassable, the wind fierce enough to sting my cheeks through multiple layers. By the time I pushed the front door open, the storm had intensified, turning the world outside into a wall of white. Snow piled against the windows, muffling all outside sound. Inside, the cabin felt welcoming, if a little cramped. I set down my bags in the modest living room, lit a single candle on the wooden table, and tried to convince myself this was just a cozy retreat. The floors creaked beneath my boots. The walls groaned with cold settling in the insulation. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea and listened. The storm outside was loud, relentless, but it was a constant, predictable noise. Then I heard it, a soft tap. At first, I thought a branch had fallen against the window, but the sound was not outside, it was inside. The tap came from the wall behind the kitchen, slow, deliberate, measured. I froze, chest tightening. My eyes darted around, but the candle cast only familiar shadows. Nothing seemed amiss. Tap, another tap. The rhythm was unnerving, almost conversational. Not a crack in the wall, not a loose shutter, it was purposeful. I swallowed hard, trying to reason it away. Perhaps the wind had moved something inside the wall, I told myself. Old cabins make noises. But the next knock came from a different wall. I had no company, no pets, and the storm made it impossible to leave. My heartbeat quickened, and a shiver ran down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it along the walls. Nothing, just old plaster, warped with age, dust particles dancing in the light. Still, the taps continued, slow, patient, deliberate. My name is Elliot. I like solitude, especially when I can combine it with snow, coffee, and long nights reading by candlelight. I had not expected my retreat to become anything other than peaceful. I unpacked, lit more candles, and tried to settle in, but the taps refused to stop. As night deepened, I became hyper-aware of every sound. The wind rattling the windows, the floorboards groaning under the weight of snow and ice, the occasional hiss of the heating system struggling against the cold. And always, beneath it all, a slow, rhythmic knock somewhere inside the walls. By midnight, I was pacing the small living room, flashlight sweeping corners, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Sometimes single, sometimes double, almost like someone was trying to communicate. I told myself it was the storm, the cold, the cabin settling. I even laughed nervously. You are alone, Elliot. This is your imagination, I whispered. But the taps were deliberate. They moved around the cabin, never staying in one spot for long. Something or someone was inside. The storm lasted for 3 days. Outside, snow piled in drifts against the windows, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the knocks became more insistent. I could hear them in the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room. They followed me as I moved, appearing to come from walls on opposite sides of the cabin at nearly the same time. I tried shouting, "Who is there?" My voice was swallowed by the wind outside. No answer, only a pause, then another knock, slower this time. My pulse was racing, my palms sweaty. I paced the cabin, flashlight trembling in my hand, heart thudding against my ribs. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every flicker of the candle made shadows leap across the walls like living things. I began imagining shapes behind the walls, faces peering from behind panels, tiny hands pressing against the plaster. My mind spun between fear and disbelief. I considered leaving immediately, but the snowstorm made escape impossible. By the second night, the knocking pattern changed. It became almost communicative. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. I tried counting, memorizing, mapping the sounds, but the sequence never repeated exactly. At times, it seemed to follow me from room to room. I tried to rationalize it: pests, drafts, old pipes, but the pattern was too precise, too patient. And sometimes I swore I heard something else. A subtle groan, a breath, barely audible, coming from behind the walls. Desperation set in. I examined the cabin for hidden doors, crawl spaces, anything that could explain the intrusion. Nothing. The panels were solid, the insulation intact. No evidence of entry. Yet the knocks continued, relentless, as if aware I was searching. A neighbor reachable only by a storm-delayed call offered no comfort. Cabin noises, old walls, they said dismissively. Storms make things sound worse. But I knew the difference. I had heard walls creak before. This was intentional, alive, watching. By the third night, I barely moved without pausing to listen. The candlelight flickered across the room, shadows dancing like hands reaching for me. Every creak made my stomach tighten. The knocking moved faster, more insistent, following me even as I tried to barricade myself in the bedroom. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. A rhythm I could not escape. I pressed my ear to the wall. A faint whisper, almost indecipherable, seemed to accompany the taps. I could not make out the words, but the intent was unmistakable. Someone or something was in the walls. Someone had made this house a trap for me. I tried logic, tried reasoning. There is nothing in the walls, Elliot. No one could survive inside them. And yet, I imagined tiny handprints pressing condensation against the plaster, subtle scratches from movement within. The paranoia became all-consuming. I counted taps obsessively, replayed the sounds in my mind, and even tried to sleep sitting up, flashlight clutched like a weapon. Morning finally arrived after the third night. The storm had subsided, leaving a world buried in white. Exhausted, I inspected the cabin carefully. That is when I found them. Tiny handprints pressed into condensation behind a vent panel in the living room. They were small, human-like, yet there was no sign of forced entry, no tracks inside the house. I called the landlord and local authorities. They found nothing unusual, suggested it was a structural quirk or prank. But I knew better. The knocks had been deliberate, patient, intentional. Someone or something had communicated through the walls. I did not know why or how, only that it had been inside the house with me, unseen but undeniable. I packed my things and left the cabin shaken, exhausted, my body tense from the relentless nights. The snow drifted quietly outside, the world seemingly peaceful. But as I closed the door for the last time, a faint tap echoed from behind the walls. One small, deliberate knock, just for me. I did not look back. I moved away, tried to forget. Friends reassured me, telling me old houses make noises. I wanted to believe them. But sometimes, at night, in unfamiliar apartments or houses, I swear I hear the same slow, rhythmic knocking. A reminder that isolation can turn ordinary walls into something alive. I never returned to that cabin. Authorities found nothing. Neighbors offered only shrugged explanations. But I know what I heard, and I know it was deliberate. A final tap, subtle, patient, echoes in my memory whenever I recount the story. It is a sound I cannot explain, a presence I cannot unhear. The snowstorm was over, the world outside calm, but I am still haunted by the rhythm of deliberate knocks. You think your home is safe. Warm inside, snow outside, cameras watching. I thought the same. But sometimes, the watchers become the watched, and you're not prepared for what you see. My name is Evan. I lived in a suburban neighborhood far enough from neighbors that quiet nights were normal, and sometimes too quiet. I worked from home and spent evenings tinkering with tech or reading, enjoying the solitude. My house was old but sturdy, cozy inside, insulated from the harsh cold outside. A doorbell camera hung above the porch, offering a faint view of the snow-covered yard and driveway. It was mid-January, the kind of night where a heavy snowfall turns the world into a muffled, white void. The porch light was on, motion-activated, casting a dim, yellow glow across the yard. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. I had learned from experience that silence can carry warnings if you know how to listen. That night, I noticed subtle things that unsettled me, a vague sense that I wasn't entirely alone, though no one else should have been. My last roommate had moved out months ago, leaving me completely alone. And yet, as I sipped my coffee and stared at the light snow falling outside, I felt a flicker of unease I couldn't shake. It started with a ping. My phone vibrated. A notification from the doorbell camera. Motion detected. I froze. It was late, and the snowfall was heavy. The yard was untouched, pristine, except for the occasional drifted pile of snow. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. At first, I saw nothing, just the dim porch light illuminating a patch of snow and the faint shadows of my siding. Then I noticed it. A dark figure, low to the ground, moving unnaturally. It wasn't walking. It was crawling, dragging itself across the snow with limbs that seemed twisted, too long in some places, almost angular. I blinked. Maybe it was a trick of the camera. Maybe my eyes were playing games. But it was real, and it was coming toward the camera. I leaned closer, gripping the edge of the couch. My heart pounded, breath shallow. I whispered to myself, What is that?" The figure's movements were deliberate, almost intelligent. It paused under the porch light. For a moment, I thought it had stopped. Then a subtle scraping sound echoed faintly, the sound of something wet or icy being dragged across snow. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night outside. I considered calling the police immediately. Part of me wanted to investigate, to look out the window, to confront whatever was there. Another part of me froze in fear. My mind raced. Was it a person? An animal? Something else entirely? The figure shifted slightly, its shadow stretching across the porch and lawn. It seemed aware of being watched. Its head, or what I assumed was a head, tilted slowly, unnaturally, as though examining the camera itself. My stomach lurched. I felt helpless, watching through a screen, unable to intervene. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself of normalcy. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, though who would crawl through a snowstorm at night like that? Maybe it was a deer or stray dog, although no animal could move like that, I thought. Still, the rational side of me clung to possibility. The figure began moving again, dragging itself toward the edge of the porch. I felt sweat prickling my scalp, cold despite the warmth inside. Its motion defied logic, limbs bending in ways they shouldn't, body low to the ground, but unnervingly fast. I dialed 911, hands shaking. "Someone's on my porch," I said, voice trembling. I don't know what it is, but it's not right." The operator tried to calm me, telling me to stay inside. I moved away from the windows, crouched in the hallway, eyes glued to the phone screen. The porch light flickered as the figure paused again, directly beneath it. Its form was indistinct, limbs seemed longer than they should be, torso twisted. Every instinct screamed at me, "Run, hide, don't look." But I couldn't look away. It lingered, almost waiting. Then it moved slightly closer to the camera, scraping softly across the snow. My stomach churned. I realized with a sinking horror that even if I ran, even if I called for help, this thing was not behaving like a normal intruder. It didn't fear me. It seemed patient. Police arrived quickly. Flashing lights illuminated the snow, sirens briefly piercing the quiet night. I led them to the porch and showed the drag marks. They found no footprints leading to or away from the porch, only faint scrapes in the snow that stopped abruptly beneath the camera. Inside, there were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no pried windows. Nothing. The officers examined the footage, but couldn't identify the figure clearly. Limbs appeared oddly proportioned, body movements unnatural. They suggested it could be an animal, a prank, or a trick of the camera, but even they looked uneasy. I moved in with a friend temporarily. My house felt different, violated. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted, crawling figure under the porch light, waiting, aware. Weeks passed. I couldn't return home. When I checked the doorbell footage remotely. I saw the same shadowy shape beneath the porch light each night. It didn't move as quickly now, just lingered, patient, watching. I sold the house eventually, though I avoided telling the buyers why. My nights are restless. I still see it in dreams, low to the ground, dragging itself, limbs bending wrong, watching, waiting. Sometimes, in a quiet room, I hear a faint scraping sound, too soft to locate, too deliberate to ignore. And I know it hasn't left. Even now, I check the porch light, and sometimes I swear I see the shadow there, waiting for me. I know how this sounds, but I swear my life was painfully normal before everything happened. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in one of those quiet suburban buildings where everyone minds their own business, and no one shares more than a polite nod in the hallway. Early December had just settled in, and the mornings were sharp with cold. Frost dusted the inside edges of my windows every night, creating small patterns like pale ferns pressed against the glass. I worked from home most days, typing away at my laptop while sipping warm tea under a fuzzy blanket. I kept the apartment tidy, mostly because clutter made the space feel smaller, and the place was already small enough. My living room and kitchen blended together, separated only by a narrow counter. A tiny Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with soft string lights that crackled faintly when the room was silent. I kept them on through the night, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because the lights made the place feel warmer, gentler. I had wrapped a few gifts that I planned to mail to friends and cousins who lived out of state. They sat under the tree in careful stacks. I am not good at wrapping, but the effort mattered to me. I used tape at crooked angles, folded corners messily, and tried to compensate with pretty bows that never quite matched the paper. Most nights, I watched a movie, answered a few messages from friends, and fell asleep listening to the hum of the heater struggling against winter. The building was old. The walls popped loudly when the temperature shifted. The pipes made groaning sounds that I had learned to tune out. It was the kind of place where you noticed every creak, but never worried about any of them. I felt safe there. Safe in the way people do in their own homes, naturally, thoughtlessly. That sense of safety was the first thing I lost. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday morning. I woke up groggy, stumbled into the living room, and froze. The gifts under my tree were unwrapped, not torn apart or ripped open like a burglar had rummaged through them. No, they were unwrapped gently. The paper had been peeled back so cleanly that the tape had not torn a single fiber. The folds had been undone with meticulous precision. It looked as if someone had wanted to see inside each gift without leaving evidence behind. The paper lay in soft piles around the tree, not shredded, but carefully placed aside. My first thought was absurd. Maybe I had done it. Maybe I had sleepwalked. I stood completely still, listening to the faint crackle of the Christmas lights. The room felt colder than usual, as if a door had been opened too long in the night. The air carried a faint scent I could not identify. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, like pine mixed with faint cologne. I crouched and lifted one of the gifts. The book inside remained untouched. Nothing was taken, nothing damaged. But every single gift I had wrapped had been opened. A soft rustle made me jump. A piece of wrapping paper slid slightly, as if nudged by air or shifting weight. I held my breath. The apartment was so still that the sound felt impossible. Someone had been in my home. Someone had been gentle. Someone had taken their time. I spent half the morning convincing myself that I must have wrapped them poorly. Maybe the temperature changes loosened the tape. Maybe the paper had slipped on its own. But there was no universe in which a gift unwrapped itself flawlessly. I told myself it had to be an accident or some kind of prank. But no one had a key to my apartment except my landlord, and he lived 2 towns away. My closest friend lived hundreds of miles off, and my parents had moved out of state. Still, denial wrapped itself around me, because denial is easier than fear. I rewrapped everything as neatly as I could, though my hands shook the entire time. I made coffee, tried to work, tried to distract myself, tried to pretend that the cold in the apartment came from thin windows, and not from the thought that someone might have stood exactly where I was standing hours earlier. When night came, I double-checked the locks. Twice, then again. The latch clicked decisively each time. I tugged the door handle to make sure it held. I tried to sleep. I failed. The sound that kept waking me was the faintest rustle of paper. Not loud, not purposeful, just soft enough that I could have imagined it, except I knew I had not. The next morning, I ran into my downstairs neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Darby. She always wore heavy coats and smelled faintly of peppermint gum. She noticed immediately that I was distracted. "You look pale, dear," she said. "Everything all right?" I hesitated. "I think someone came into my apartment last night." Her eyes sharpened. "Did you check your windows? These old latches slip. A breeze can put them out of line." "No," I replied slowly. "The windows are fine, and the gifts under my tree were opened." Her expression shifted from concern to something deeper, something like recognition. She leaned in and lowered her voice. "About 8 years ago, the tenant before you complained about something similar. Wrapped things in her living room kept being disturbed. She thought it was the building manager checking for candles or fire hazards, but he swore he never entered without notice." My stomach tightened. "What did she do?" "She moved out," Mrs. Darby whispered. "Said she could not sleep knowing somebody was handling her things in the dark. I believe her. That building is too old. There are too many ways in." I felt my throat dry. "Do you mean like the front door?" "I mean, she said very quietly, that older buildings sometimes have crawl spaces and forgotten service doors. Places a person could slip through if they knew the layout. The lights above us flickered. Mrs. Darby squeezed my arm gently. "If something feels wrong," she murmured, "trust that feeling." It was not reassurance. It was a warning. That night, I made a choice. I decided I needed to know what was happening. I needed evidence, answers, something to prove I was not simply losing my mind. So I bought a cheap motion-activated camera at a nearby store. It was small, white, and simple enough to set up on the narrow counter facing the living room and front door. I tested it twice. It clicked faintly each time it detected movement. Then I tidied the wrapping paper, placed all the gifts neatly under the tree, and sat for a long moment listening to the faint hum of the Christmas lights. The room felt tense, as if it were waiting with me. I went to bed early, leaving the camera armed and pointed directly at the gifts. Trying to sleep felt impossible. Every sound in the apartment, every crack of a wall settling, every sigh of a pipe cooling kept jolting me awake. I thought I heard breathing once. Not my own. Slow, steady, in rhythm with nothing human. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I jolted awake around 2 a.m. to a sensation I could not describe. The room felt colder. My breath fogged faintly in the darkness. The soft crackle of the Christmas lights was the only sound. I sat up slowly, listened. Nothing, but the cold was so intense, so unnatural, that my skin prickled with dread. I held myself still until the cold eased, replaced by a dense, suffocating stillness. When morning finally arrived, pale and gentle, I rushed to the camera. The recordings showed nothing. No movement, no disturbance. The gifts were still neatly wrapped. The tree lights remained steady. But something was off. One of the boxes, one with bright red paper, was turned slightly. Just a small rotation. A few inches. Something subtle. I could have dismissed it, but my stomach twisted. That box had been aligned perfectly the night before. I remembered because I had arranged the gifts in a neat row, spacing them evenly. Now the spacing was wrong. Something had been there. Something that moved silently enough not to trigger the camera. Or else something that moved carefully around its detection radius. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I tried to work. I tried to smile at the neighbor passing me on the sidewalk. But I could feel something watching me in the apartment. Something aware of every breath I took. That night, I moved the camera closer. A few inches from the tree. It would not miss anything this time. At least, that is what I believed. Saturday night was quiet. Too quiet. The building usually had muffled footsteps upstairs, distant televisions humming through thin walls, or soft clanking of radiators switching on and off. But not that night. That night, the entire building felt empty. as though everyone had packed their things and left without telling me. The silence weighed so heavily that each time I swallowed, the sound echoed in my own head. I sat on the couch, watching the gifts for a long time before bed. I listened carefully to the faint rustle of wrapping paper. Once, I heard a slow scrape, like a box shifting gently, purposefully. My heart pounded. The scent returned too, faint pine mixed with something masculine, something sharp but subtle. A scent no one had reason to bring into my apartment. I forced myself to go to bed, but I left my bedroom door slightly open, something I never did. I needed to hear everything. The heater clicked on, then off, then on again. The lights buzzed faintly, then fell silent. Around midnight, the cold began to seep through the apartment again, slow and steady, like an unseen door had been opened. I curled beneath my blanket, held my breath, waited. I could swear I heard footsteps, soft, careful, moving through the living room. I waited until the cold faded, until the silence returned, until my heartbeat slowed. Then I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. At exactly 3 minutes past 3 in the morning, a sound yanked me from sleep. A click, soft, metallic. My breath caught. It was the sound of a latch, a door latch, but I was not sure if it was the front door or the bedroom door or something else entirely. I sat upright slowly, listening with every cell in my body. Silence, but a dense, heavy type of silence, the kind that fills a room when someone is holding their breath. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. I checked the camera feed. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The gifts were open, all of them, again. Paper peeled back with absolute care, as if watched by unseen eyes. And right there, on the video timeline, sat a motion alert. I tapped it. The video began, the front door still silent. At 3 minutes past 3, the doorknob turned. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly. Not from the outside, from the inside. The lock slid open. The door latch clicked softly, the same sound that had woken me. But the door did not open. It unlocked, as if someone was leaving. I watched the slow, deliberate turn of the handle, felt my breath go shallow. There was no visible person, no shadow, no outline, just the handle moving, like a ghostly hand guided it with practiced silence. The handle returned gently to its resting position. Then nothing. The video ended. There was no explanation, no figure, no animal, no glitch, just the door unlocking itself as though someone had slipped out, leaving behind only unwrapped gifts. It took me nearly 10 minutes to gather the courage to get out of bed. My legs shook uncontrollably beneath me. The idea of checking the living room filled me with a dread so intense that it made my vision blur. But the need for answers overpowered fear. When I stepped into the hallway, a blast of cold air struck me, sharp, unnatural cold. The living room lights flickered once as I approached. Every gift lay open again, every box carefully unwrapped, every piece of paper smoothed and placed aside, like someone wanted me to see the contents clearly. But nothing was missing, nothing damaged, just studied, as if someone had been trying to understand me. I inhaled shakily. That same unfamiliar scent lingered in the air, pine, cologne, something faintly sweet, a residue of someone's presence. I walked toward the door. The lock was unlatched, the deadbolt slightly loose, as if someone had been testing it. I realized then that whoever had entered did not want to steal anything. They wanted to observe, to know how I lived, to touch my belongings quietly, intimately. That was when true fear settled in my stomach. Someone obsessed with your belongings is obsessed with you. I called the police the moment the sun rose. 2 officers came by mid-morning. They examined the door, tested the lock, looked at the gifts, and watched the footage. The younger officer frowned. Looks like you may not have closed the door all the way. These old locks slip. I tried to steady my voice. The door did not slip. The handle turned. The lock slid open. Slowly. The older officer shrugged. You would be surprised how much movement a loose handle can make. They both looked tired. I could tell they thought I was overreacting. They suggested that the unwrapped gifts were probably the result of poorly applied tape or heat changes from the heater. Heat changes did not unwrap gifts with surgical precision, but they left, and I was alone again. I decided I could not stay another night. I threw clothes into a duffel bag and packed toiletries hurriedly. I decided to sleep at a friend's place across town. Before leaving, I took one last walk through the apartment, scanning every corner to make sure nothing else was disturbed. Everything seemed normal. But then I looked at the small stack of shopping bags beside the couch. Gifts I had purchased early for next Christmas, still in their store packaging. The bags were gone. Not gone from the apartment, gone from their bags, because each item was already wrapped, perfectly, neatly, beautifully, wrapped in paper I did not own, wrapped with skill I did not possess, wrapped with quiet intention, as if someone had wanted to return the favor, as if someone was saying, I can do it better. I can do it anytime. I know everything you have. I forced myself not to scream. I backed away slowly, as though whoever wrapped the gifts might still be in the apartment, hiding only a few steps away. The apartment hummed faintly with the sound of the heater, but beneath it there was another sound. A light scrape, the sound of something shifting within the walls or slipping through a hidden crawl space. I stepped toward the door. My hands shook so badly that it took 3 tries to lock it behind me. I was afraid to turn my back, afraid that if I did, I would see the door handle turning again. When I finally reached my car, my breaths came in sharp bursts. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I felt watched, not from outside the building, from inside it. The sensation did not leave me for days. It has been 2 weeks since I left that apartment. I never slept there again. I told the landlord I would not renew my lease. He told me I needed to return the keys in person. I mailed them instead. I never figured out how anyone got in. The police insisted no locks were broken. No windows were tampered with. No crawl spaces existed. But I know what I saw. Someone had been entering my home. Someone quiet. Someone patient. Someone who wanted to learn me. Down to the way I wrapped gifts. Down to the things I kept hidden. I tell this story now because I have begun to notice something. A faint rustle near the closet in my new apartment. A soft scent of pine when I wake up. And once, only once, I found a small scrap of red wrapping paper near my bed. I know how this sounds, but I swear I lock every door before I go to sleep. And I swear someone else knows how to unlock it. Before everything happened, my life was quiet, predictable, uneventful in that particular way people assume is peaceful. But really, it was just routine. I worked from home as a customer service representative for an online retailer, the kind of job that did not require much emotional investment. My days passed in a loop of emails, muted phone calls, and reheated meals eaten in front of the same worn coffee table. I lived in a ground floor apartment tucked into an older complex on the far edge of town. It was the kind of place meant for single adults who needed something affordable, but not unsafe. Most tenants were older people who kept to themselves. A few were students. No one hosted parties. No one had visitors. No one lingered outside longer than necessary because the outdoor lights buzzed, and the parking lot always smelled faintly of cold exhaust. By mid-December, the air had grown so sharp that I could see my breath when I opened the sliding patio door to let out the monthly stale chill. Frost webbed across my windows each morning, delicate and temporary, as if the apartment were exhaling in the night. I tried to make the place feel warmer for the holidays, even if I would be spending them alone. A short artificial tree, 6, maybe 8 gifts beneath it, warm white string lights, a cinnamon candle I burned every evening until the wax burrowed down like a crater. Life was simple and safe, or at least I thought it was. Nothing truly sinister had happened in my life before that December. Not really. I locked my doors. I kept to a schedule. But familiarity can be its own kind of blindness. I did not realize how many assumptions I had been making about safety, about solitude, about ownership of my own space, until the night someone proved every one of them wrong. It began with the gifts, or more specifically, the way I found them one morning. I had wrapped each one myself the night before. sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a mug of cocoa, and that low-crackle holiday playlist humming softly in the background. I am not a good rapper. Never have been. My folds were crooked, my tape pieces overlapped, and one of the boxes had paper patched over where I accidentally tore it. The next morning, the boxes were naked. Every gift lay unwrapped, each piece of paper carefully peeled and placed in a neat pile to the side of the tree. There was no tearing, no ripped edges, no haste. Whoever did it, if anyone did it, handled the paper like they were afraid to damage it. At first, I stood there blinking at the scene, waiting for my brain to catch up. This was not how I left things. It could not have been. The room was freezing, colder than usual. But I chalked it up to the draft from the sliding door. That thing let air leak even when it was locked. I crouched and touched the paper stack. The sheets were smooth and nearly perfect, lines straight, folds crisp, like someone had flattened them with care. No one had broken in. No valuables were missing. Nothing else was disturbed. Just my gifts. That should have been impossible. But my mind, ever desperate for logic, scrambled to fill in the blanks. Maybe I dreamed finishing them. Maybe I had not secured the tape properly. Maybe I had sleepwalked, even though I had never done that before. I tried to believe those explanations, because the alternative was too unsettling to consider. But even then, I felt it, the faint rumble of something shifting beneath the surface of my day-to-day life. A warning in the shape of a question. If someone was here, when did they come? And how long had they been watching? I wish I could say I panicked right away. I should have. Anyone sensible would have called the police, or at least a friend. But the human mind is stubborn. Mine especially. I spent the rest of the day telling myself nothing was wrong. I wrapped the gifts again, poorly as always, and placed them back under the tree in the exact order they had been. I told myself that I must have done something careless, that stress had scrambled my memory, that this was not a mystery, but a mistake. I refused, every instinct screaming at me. When night fell, I left the string lights on, their soft crackle filling the silence. I locked the front door. I locked the sliding door. I checked the windows. Twice. Then I tried to sleep. But a feeling clung to me. A feeling of being observed. As if someone was nearby. Not in a dramatic horror sense. Not in a supernatural sense. Just present. My apartment no longer felt like mine. It felt like someone else's hands had been here. Someone else's breath had moved the air. Still, I refused the truth. The next day, my neighbor, Mrs. Kemp, an older woman who lived alone with her tortoiseshell cat, gave me a clue I did not realize was a clue at the time. I was returning from checking my mail when she shuffled up with her coat, hanging loosely over her small shoulders. "You all right, Jordan? You look pale," she said, peering at me through glasses smudged with fingerprints. I almost brushed it off, but but something in her tone made me pause. Just weird morning, I admitted. Someone messed with my Christmas gifts, probably my own fault. Her expression shifted small, almost imperceptible. Then she asked, "Have you checked your vents?" It was such an odd question that I froze halfway to my door. My vents? Yes. In older buildings, sometimes maintenance workers come through without warning if they think something is off. Checking ducts, filters, insulation. I told management to warn tenants, but they rarely do. It soothed me a little. Not much, but enough to keep me from spiraling. "Maybe someone came early," she said. "Maybe they needed access and figured you were sleeping." She did not say anything sinister, but the implication lingered. Someone could enter without me knowing. Maybe already had. That night, I decided to investigate. Not dramatically, not bravely, more like a person desperate to prove themselves wrong. I went through every room with my phone flashlight. I checked the vents. I checked under the bed. I checked the sliding door for scratches. I checked the hinges on the front door. Nothing looked tampered with, but the cold was worse. A steady, invasive chill seeped along the floorboards, pooling near the tree as if drawn to it. I sat in the living room couch, watching the tree lights flicker. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, paper sliding against carpet. I turned on the lamp so fast I nearly knocked it over. Nothing moved, but the pile of wrapping paper I had rewrapped earlier. It looked different, slightly shifted. That was when I decided someone was coming in at night. I needed proof. I ordered a cheap, motion-activated camera online. Overnight shipping. And for the first time in my life, I slept with every light in my apartment turned on. I thought the night before had been unsettling, but the next morning proved everything beyond denial. All the gifts were unwrapped again, every single one. The paper lay in meticulous piles, sorted as if by size or pattern. Each gift box was nudged slightly apart from the others, lined up, measured, symmetrical. Someone had been in my home, while I slept under bright lights, while the heating unit clicked on and off, while traffic drifted past outside. Not a thing was missing, not one item out of place, except the gifts. I barely breathed. My apartment felt wrong. The air felt touched thinner somehow, like someone had stolen warmth from it. To test myself, I left a scrap of paper balanced on top of one of the boxes. If it moved, I would know someone had returned. Allies? No one could be an ally in this, because no one believed me. And I did not want to become the tenant everyone avoided, the unhinged one. Enemies? Yes, something was here. Someone, though I still did not know its intentions, its patterns, its access point, its proximity to me while I slept. The camera arrived the next afternoon. It was small, a white plastic cube with a single blinking light too insignificant to protect me. I set it up on a bookshelf facing the living room. I adjusted the angle 3 times, wanting the tree centered in view. I paced around the room, speaking aloud to test audio range, checking coverage near the hallway. I did not want to sleep, but I did. Or rather, I passed out from a combination of exhaustion and dread. The moment before sleep claimed me, I swore I heard a click from the hallway, like the faintest sound of a doorknob turning. When I woke up, it was still dark. The clock read 2:47 in the morning. Something felt off. Too quiet, too still. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and opened the camera app. Motion detected. 1 clip. A warning flashed across the screen. Camera detected movement at 2:47 a.m. I pressed play. The footage showed my empty living room, cast in dim light from the string lights. Nothing moved. Then, near the 7th second, a figure stepped into view from the hallway. The shape was tall, human, shadowed, but what made my skin crawl was the slowness of its movements, methodical, deliberate, as if it was pacing itself to avoid sound. It paused near the tree, bent down, picked up a scrap of wrapping paper with 2 fingers, held it for a long moment, almost contemplative, then walked calmly out of frame. The clip ended. I did not breathe for several seconds. My body went cold, immobilized by the truth I had been trying so hard to deny. Someone had been inside. Someone still had access. Someone had reached the hallway outside my bedroom. Someone had stood near the untouched gifts with the quiet certain. My reward, if it could be called that, was knowledge, confirmation, proof that I was not losing my mind. But that reward came with a cost. Understanding the magnitude of danger I was in. This was not a break-in. This was not theft. This was someone comfortable inside my walls. Someone with time and confidence. Someone who worked silently enough to unwrap each gift twice without waking me. I called the police from the parking lot, shaking so hard I dropped my keys twice before getting into my car. 2 officers searched my apartment. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No fingerprints. They suggested I might have forgotten to lock the door. Then they suggested I might have staged the video, or misinterpreted it, or imagined the situation under holiday stress. They did not believe me, but belief no longer mattered. Truth did. I decided I would not stay another night. I packed nothing because I did not want to go back inside for longer than necessary. As I was leaving, I glanced toward the tree one last time. All the gifts, all of them, were wrapped again, perfectly, edges aligned, corners tucked, tape invisible, as if the intruder had wanted to fix my mistakes, as if they took pride in their work, as if they felt we were collaborating. A sick kind of partnership. I fled. That should have been the end of the story. But horrors rarely end cleanly. 2 days after abandoning the apartment, I received an automated message from the apartment management office reminding me to pick up my belongings or schedule a move-out inspection. I should have ignored it, but curiosity or something darker pulled at me, so I returned, just once, just to look through the window. There was nothing inside except the tree and the remaining bags of items I had bought for next Christmas. I had purchased them weeks earlier and never wrapped them. The bags had been left in the corner, untouched, except now they were not in bags. Every new item was wrapped perfectly, so neatly it looked professional, so precisely that each gift sat at equal distances apart. The message was unmistakable, a farewell or a reminder. I did not go inside. I did not try to retrieve the camera or the tree or the neatly wrapped gifts. I turned away and kept walking. Now I tell this story so no one else is caught off guard. No one else dismisses the subtle wrongness in their home. No one else assumes locked doors actually mean safety. If you ever wake to find your belongings moved slightly, if you ever hear a soft rustle in the night, if your home feels inexplicably cold, look closer. Because I learned something the hard way. The most terrifying intruders are not the ones who break things. They are the ones who touch everything gently. And the truth is terrifying in its simplicity. He never broke in. He never left. This is not a story I want to tell, not because it is unbelievable, but because it is. The kind of horror that does not scream or crash through your door. It waits, it taps, and it will not stop. You are about to hear what happened to me that winter in the middle of the night, in a hallway that should have been empty. A knocking that outlasted my sanity. A presence that never left. Before the knocking started, my life was uneventful in the quiet, almost painfully ordinary way that can lull you into a false sense of security. I lived alone in a small, second-floor apartment at the far end of an old building. The hallway outside my door was narrow, dim, and lit by a single flickering bulb that buzzed relentlessly. Its hum the soundtrack of my late night returns from work. I liked it there. Cheap rent, a view of the cracked asphalt parking lot, and almost no neighbors meant peace, or so I thought. During the day, I worked remotely in graphic design, eyes glued to the glow of my computer screen. Nights were spent reading or watching old movies, bundled under a blanket as the heater sputtered and hissed. I rarely went out, especially in winter, and I had grown used to the quiet. The building had a rhythm, the squeak of pipes, the occasional thud of the neighbor upstairs pacing, the rattle of heating vents, but none of it ever felt threatening. That winter, the snow had arrived early. Frost clung to the windows, coating them in delicate patterns. The wind outside moaned and twisted through the empty streets, scraping the bare trees against the glass. It was cold enough that I could see my breath in the hall when I opened my door, and for most of my life, that had been enough. It started with the first knock. I know the exact time because my clock radio blared in half-asleep tones when I reached for it. 1:07 a.m. A slow, deliberate knock at my door. Not urgent, not impatient, just a steady tap. At first, I thought it must be a neighbor who had confused the date or an early delivery. I ignored it. It echoed through the empty hallway. I paused, listening to the way the knock vibrated against the thin walls. Something about it was off. It did not sound human in its rhythm. It was too precise, too relentless. I opened my door just enough to peek into the dark hall. Nothing. No one. The hallway was empty, cold air swirling faintly around the flickering bulb. It continued. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Maybe a tenant down the hall was messing with me. Maybe it was an animal trapped somewhere making a hollow knock against a door. I tried reasoning with myself. I shouted, "Hello, who is it?" The knocking did not change pace. Not once. Not even when I called the landlord's office, my voice trembling over the phone. I attempted to sleep, listening as the knocks punctuated every 2 seconds. Lying in my bed, I told myself to ignore it, to convince my brain it was a coincidence. My heart hammered anyway. Late that morning, I ran into Mrs. Vance, the older tenant 2 doors down. She had been in the building longer than anyone and always smelled faintly of peppermint and old books. "Morning, Noah," she said kindly. "You look pale. Everything okay?" I hesitated. There's something at my door, knocking nonstop all night. She frowned knowingly. Ah, the knocking. It always happens when the floor is mostly empty for the holidays. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Not the first tenant to call about it," she murmured. "Sometimes it stops before sunrise. Sometimes it does not. The cameras. Broken. Management claims they check them. They do not. Just strange things happen when no one is around." Her tone chilled me more than the knocking ever could. I decided to confront it. Not bravely, not armed, but carefully. I placed a chair against my door, leaned my ear to the peephole, and waited. The knock continued. Steady, mechanical, 2 seconds apart, no variation. My breath quickened, visible in the thin beam of the hallway light. I whispered, "Who's there?" No response. The door vibrated slightly with every strike, a subtle echo running along the hall. The flickering light hummed and buzzed. My phone battery hovered near 10%. I refused to call the police. I feared provoking whoever or whatever might be outside. Hours passed. I moved cautiously, pacing the apartment. Each time I crept toward the door to check the peephole, my shadow stretched grotesquely under the flickering bulb. Floorboards creaked beneath my steps. My hands shook as I held the doorknob, listening to the persistent, almost meditative rhythm outside. No one responded to shouting. No footsteps receded. The knocking did not pause. I tried recording it on my phone. The microphone barely captured the slow beat, but the echo filled the empty hallway like a sinister heartbeat. The wind outside rattled the window panes, the radiator hissed, and still the knock persisted. It was exhausting, terrifying. The sound became tactile, almost physical. I could feel each strike through my chest, as if the person was not using a hand, but pressing their presence into the wood itself. By 4 a.m., I was sitting on the floor, knees against my chest, counting the rhythm. I could not think, could not sleep, could not stop listening. Every 2 seconds, punctuating the hours like a cruel metronome. I considered leaving, running to the lobby, the street, anywhere. But fear rooted me. I could not move while the knocking persisted. When I tried to call the landlord, I was met with an empty line. The building was silent, the other units unoccupied, the wind rattling the old windows. I understood then. I was alone, completely, and there was nothing I could do but wait. Sunrise was a blur of gray light sliding under the flickering bulb. I do not know how long I had been crouched there, but I could feel the hours etched into my muscles and bones. At 7 a.m., the knocking stopped, just stopped. No slow fade, no hesitation, nothing. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, then shakily 10. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. No one. Only cold air lingering in the space where the knock had been. Then I noticed the carpet. Wet footprints. One set, leading from the stairwell to my door, and then back again. The prints were small but clear, spaced exactly as though someone had not moved their feet for hours, except for the motion of their arm delivering the knocks. I called the landlord. They asked for video footage. None existed. Cameras had been dead for days. Strange, they said, almost casually. You are not the first tenant to complain. It always happens when the floor is mostly empty for the holidays. The ordeal gave me one thing: certainty. Proof that the knock had been real. And with certainty came fear, absolute and naked. I could not rationalize it. Could not file a complaint that would be taken seriously. Could not pretend the hallway was safe. The knocker had left nothing behind, no note, no sign of entry. Just the memory of the sound, the wet footprints, and the knowledge that someone, somehow, had existed in that space for hours, while I trembled behind the door. That night, I slept with a chair wedged under my doorknob. I considered leaving the building permanently. I stayed awake until exhaustion forced me to close my eyes. I thought the horror had ended. It had not. I awoke to the sound of rapping at my bedroom window. Not the door, the window. Slow, deliberate, measured. Every 2 seconds. I froze, heart hammering. Not enough strength to move. The wind outside made the glass rattle, mixing with the rhythm in a terrifying duet. The knock was back, not from the hallway, not from outside, from somewhere impossibly close, watching, waiting. I moved out the next day, packed only what I could carry, leaving behind everything else. The landlord shrugged. Cameras still dead. No explanation. I tell this story now so others understand. Sometimes, the simplest sound, repeated, unwavering, patient, can become the most terrifying. The knock is not about force. It is about persistence, about waiting, about reminding you that safety is an illusion and that silence can be weaponized. If you ever hear a slow, deliberate knock in an empty hallway, count the seconds. Do not ignore it. Do not open the door. And pray it does not learn your apartment number, because it is patient and it will not stop. When a storm cuts off the lights and blankets the world in silence, the things we fear most can slip inside our homes. And sometimes they wait right outside our doors. My name is Harper. I live alone in a single-family house tucked into the rural outskirts of town. The neighborhood is sparse, houses spaced far apart, blanketed in trees and fields that vanish into the horizon. Nights are quiet, often so quiet that the slightest sound feels magnified. I liked it that way, most of the time. This night, however, the quiet felt different. A blizzard had moved in during the late afternoon, blanketing everything in snow, whipping branches against the house, rattling windows, and coating the ground in a blinding white. By the time I returned from running errands, the power was already out. Streetlights flickered and died. The house was dark, except for the occasional flash of lightning, illuminating the long, narrow hallway that led to my bedroom at the far end. I had always trusted the house to keep me safe. Old doors, sturdy locks, thick walls. I had no reason to doubt it. And yet, as I lit a flashlight and checked the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching from just beyond the walls. A faint whisper of anxiety that had followed me since childhood stirred in my chest. I kept hearing faint noises that might have been the wind or might have been something else. I went to bed early, hoping the storm would lull me into sleep. But as soon as my head touched the pillow, the house felt impossibly large, silent, and threatening. It started softly, almost imperceptibly. A low exhale, measured and deliberate. I thought it was my imagination at first, the sound of the storm echoing through the old walls. But the rhythm was different, controlled, close. I froze, gripping the blanket over my chest. My bedroom door was closed. The hallway beyond was dark, almost black except for occasional flashes of lightning outside. The sound repeated, slow inhaling and exhaling. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. My heart raced. I told myself it had to be a neighbor, stranded or lost, somehow outside. But the house was isolated. The nearest neighbor was at least a quarter-mile away. I held my breath. Every gust of wind rattled the windows and deepened the shadows. Floorboards creaked under the pressure of the storm, echoing unnervingly through the walls. And still, the breathing didn't pause. Slow, deliberate, patient. I debated leaving the bedroom to check the door. Part of me wanted to see, to confront whatever waited outside. Another part screamed at me to stay, to hide, to survive the night. My hands shook. Goosebumps spread across my arms despite the blanket. I tried to distract myself, counting silently, focusing on the storm, the hum of the wind, anything but the sound just beyond the door. But the breathing persisted. Every inhale was exaggerated, almost theatrical. I could feel it through the thin door, pressing into the edges, slipping into the cracks. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. Every lightning flash made the hallway look longer, more menacing. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was the storm, a trick of the mind. But then, a subtle shift. The door handle rattled, slow, intentional. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe properly. My chest ached as if the fear was physical. The handle stopped. The breathing continued. I could hear it more clearly now, slow and wet, inhaling and exhaling with a rhythm that mocked the storm outside. I imagined a shadow pressed against the door, limbs splayed unnaturally. The rational part of me screamed, "It's just the storm. It's impossible. It can't be real." Yet every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. I felt the house shrink around me, the hallway narrowing, the air thickening. I wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped by the sound, by the darkness, by the knowledge that someone or something was outside my door, watching, waiting. I whispered, voice barely audible, "Please go away." No response, only breathing, slow, methodical, unyielding. The storm raged on through the night. I stayed huddled under blankets, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, every flutter of curtain made me flinch. I dared not open the door, dared not move from my bed. Morning came slowly. Light filtered through the snow, gray and muted. The house seemed impossibly still, the storm having passed. I summoned every ounce of courage and approached the door. Locked, undisturbed. No scratches, no marks, no sign of forced entry. I stepped outside. Snow covered the yard. Only one set of footprints led away from the house, from the side of the door to the edge of the driveway. They ended abruptly, as if the person or thing had vanished into thin air. I took photos, documented everything. Rational explanations flitted through my mind, perhaps a prankster, a hallucination, or a wandering animal. But deep down, I knew. The slow, deliberate breathing had been real. I never slept well again during storms. Even months later, when the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, I imagined that sound, slow inhaling, methodical, patient, just beyond my bedroom door. I moved some months later, choosing a different town, a busier street. Yet the memory persists. I recall every inhale, every subtle shift in the air, every long, deliberate exhale that seemed to fill the hallway. Sometimes, in the quiet of my new home, I think I hear it again. Slow breathing beyond the door. I waited the entire night, and though the storm cleared, I knew it hadn't left. And I still hear it in my dreams, slow and deliberate, just outside my door. You think you are alone in your apartment. That soft hum of the heater is just background noise. But what if it was not the heater? What if something else was there, whispering your name, waiting for you to notice? This is my story, the story of what I heard and what I cannot explain. Listen carefully, and perhaps you will feel it too. I know it sounds insane, but the heater was not whispering. Someone or something was saying my name. Over and over, my name, Morgan, softly, slowly. The first time it happened, I had just gotten home from work on a late winter evening. My apartment building was older, the kind where the central heating system rattled through walls and ceilings like a living creature. The vent above my bedroom hummed as it always did, warm air spilling into the room. But that night, there was something off. I was tired, frozen from the cold outside, and the apartment was dim. A single lamp in the corner flickered slightly as I moved toward it, throwing shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I remember sinking into the couch, trying to ignore the sound, but then I heard it. Morgan. I froze, heart skipping. My eyes darted around the room. The hum of the heater was normal, mechanical, soothing even, but the voice, soft, deliberate, was not. I could not place it. It did not sound like my neighbor, or the wind rattling the old windows. It was coming from the vents. The thought made me laugh nervously. It is just the heater, I whispered to myself. I am imagining things. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, almost playful. Morgan. I sat up, lamp in hand, scanning every shadow. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Only the heater hummed, the warm air brushing my cheeks. Goosebumps prickled my skin. My logical mind raced. Maybe a neighbor had pranked me, or it was some strange acoustic echo I did not understand. Still, a chill ran down my spine that I could not shake. I am a person who likes routine. I enjoy quiet nights, reading or scrolling through my phone with the heater running softly beside me. I live alone, and my apartment is on the third floor of an old brick building in a quiet neighborhood. Snow had started falling outside that night, muffling the sounds of the street. The isolation, once comforting, began to feel like a trap. At first, the whispers were subtle. I would hear them only when the apartment was silent, usually late at night. Morgan, the name would drift through the vents, almost teasing me. I checked the heater, moved furniture, even listened carefully to see if it was a sound bouncing off the walls, but there was no other source. The first week, I convinced myself it was paranoia. stress from work, too much caffeine, the darkness. But as the days went by, the whispers became more insistent. Not just my name now. Sometimes there were phrases, half-formed, like fragments of conversation I could not catch. I began sleeping, with my phone recording ambient noise, hoping to catch some logical explanation. But every morning, the recordings revealed only static and the low hum of the heater. Nothing else. It was starting to feel like the apartment itself had decided to toy with me. By the second week, I could no longer ignore it. The whispering began during the day, too, though more faintly. I would be making tea in the kitchen when I heard it through the vent above the stove. Morgan. I spun around. Empty room. Only the soft hiss of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the building settled. I tried rational explanations. Could it be my mind playing tricks? Could a bird or rodent in the vents cause sounds that resemble words? None of it made sense. One night, I stayed in the apartment, phone in hand, waiting. I sat perfectly still, lamp dimmed low, listening. The hum grew louder as the heater cycled, then faint at first, almost playful, my name again. Morgan, Morgan. I froze. I could feel the warm air from the vent brush my arm, and yet I felt watched. My chest tightened, shallow breaths catching. The logical part of my mind screamed to leave, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, compelled to listen, terrified of missing something. That night, I heard a scratching sound following the whispers, coming from the ductwork. Slow, deliberate, almost like claws or fingernails scraping metal. My pulse accelerated, and I realized I had to act. I could not just sit there waiting for the apartment to decide it would eat me alive. I called maintenance the next morning. A polite, unsuspecting man came, flashlight in hand, and checked the ducts. He pulled open grates, peered into the depths, shook his head. "Nothing in here," he said. "No access points, no tampering. Probably just the old system settling." I wanted to believe him, but that night, the whispers returned louder, clearer, right above my bed. Morgan. By the third week, paranoia was clawing at my mind. I spoke to a neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for decades. Her eyes widened when I explained what I heard. "You are not the first," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "Years ago, someone else lived in your apartment. They disappeared. Some said they heard voices too, from the vents. They never found them, just gone." Her words set my stomach twisting. I asked for details. She could not recall much, only that the authorities found no evidence of foul play. But the building had an odd history of residents vanishing under strange circumstances. That night, I sat in the dark with my laptop, heart hammering, listening. The whispering started sooner than usual, almost immediately as the heater turned on. "Morgan, why are you hiding?" I dropped my laptop in shock. My apartment, my sanctuary, had become a cage. My thoughts spiraled, What if someone had entered the vents? Impossible. Maintenance had checked. There were no access points. Yet the voice came soft, intimate, mocking. I began hearing it everywhere. Walking to the bathroom. Washing dishes. The vents, always the vents. The sound of my own name, slow and deliberate, echoing through impossibly narrow spaces. Desperation drove me to investigate further. I borrowed tools and tried to open parts of the vent system myself. Every grate, every access panel yielded nothing. The ducts were sealed, inaccessible without specialized equipment. Nothing could have been hiding there, and yet it persisted. The scratches, the whispers, the occasional rush of warm air that felt personal. It followed me. I considered leaving, moving to a new apartment. But even as I packed, I heard it faintly in the boxes, in the walls. One night, curiosity overcame fear. I whispered back, "Who is there?" The reply came, slower this time, with a resonance that made my blood run cold. "Morgan, it is me." The final confrontation was anticlimactic, yet terrifying. I called maintenance again, insisted on a complete inspection of the heating system. New units were installed, ducts sealed with extra care. The building manager tried to reassure me, but even he admitted that old systems sometimes made strange noises. For a few nights, I heard nothing. Relief, sleep returned, until one night the heater clicked on as usual. My apartment was dark except for the lamp. I was about to drift off when I heard it, soft and deliberate. "Morgan." I sat upright, sweat soaking my pajamas, heart racing. No one had been in the vents. No logical explanation existed. I slept with earplugs after that, but sometimes, when the heater kicked on, I still hear my name. The apartment feels empty, yet alive. Safe, yet watching. I do not know what it is or why it calls me, and perhaps I never will. Some nights, when the wind rattles the windows and the heater hums low, I can swear it is whispering for more than just attention. It is inviting me, coaxing me, reminding me that it knows I am alone. I do not look up at the vents anymore. I do not try to understand. I just listen and pray it does not grow impatient. This is a story about a winter night that felt safe, until it didn't. Parker thought their cozy home, blanketed in snow, was a refuge. But some songs should never be sung alone. I lived alone in a small, older house at the edge of a quiet suburban street. The kind of street that smelled of pine in summer and smelled faintly of smoke in winter. My name is Parker. I worked from home and liked quiet evenings with books or soft jazz playing in the background. It was mid-December. A sudden winter storm had rolled in overnight, covering the streets with a thick blanket of snow. Trees bowed under the weight of frost, and the wind rattled against the windows like restless fingers. My fireplace, cold now, was the only source of warmth I trusted. I stacked logs neatly beside it, even as the draft sneaked in around the edges of the chimney. The house felt cozy, but vulnerable. I didn't think much of the first odd sound. A soft hum from the fireplace, faint, almost comforting. It seemed like the wind playing tricks, a fluke of acoustics in the old brick. But the hum stayed, and I didn't like that. A few years ago, I had lost a friend unexpectedly. That memory had left a subtle mark, a whisper of anxiety that never quite left me when I was alone. Normally, I could shrug off unexplained noises. Tonight, I couldn't. It started as a hum, soft, distant. I thought it was the wind, but then it grew louder. I was sitting on the couch, a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the fireplace. The candle on the mantel flickered. Shadows stretched long and thin across the walls. I heard the hum again, this time unmistakably a tune. Silent night. I froze. My breath hitched. My mind raced. The windows were closed, the doors locked. No one else was here. Yet, the notes came from the fireplace itself. I approached slowly. Every step made the floorboards groan. I knelt and peered into the dark mouth of the chimney. Cold air rushed out, smelling faintly of ash. The hum stopped for a heartbeat. Then it started again, louder, clearer. I reached for a log, tapped it gently. A faint echo of the hum responded, like the house itself was listening. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello," I whispered. My voice sounded small in the cavernous room. Silence. Then the hum returned, more insistent, almost conversational, almost alive. I retreated to the couch, shaking. The wind rattled the windows. The candle's flame quivered as if in fear. I tried to convince myself it was the storm, some strange echo, a trick of the air. But I knew it was. I kept hearing it through the night. A voice singing softly, close enough to be under the couch or inside the fireplace. I couldn't tell. Every time I leaned closer to investigate, it stopped. Every time I backed away, it began again, taunting, knowing I was listening. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind sounded like a footstep. Every shadow looked like a face. By midnight, I was frantic. The storm had knocked out power, leaving me with the fireplace and a single candle. I grabbed a flashlight, heart in my throat, and edged toward the fireplace. "Who's there?" I called. My voice cracked. Silence answered. Then a single note, drawn out, mournful. The ember's heat kissed my fingers as I touched the mantel, but the candle flickered wildly. I crouched and shone the flashlight down the chimney. Nothing, just darkness, cold. The hum escalated into full lyrics now. I could understand every word. Silent night, holy night. A draft blew ash onto my face. I coughed, eyes watering. And then I saw it traces of black soot, forming shapes that might have been footprints or fingers. I blinked. They were gone. The hum stopped instantly. The silence felt sharp, hungry. I backed away, shaking, stumbling over the rug. The fireplace sat quietly. Too quietly. Too perfectly normal. I sat in the corner, knees to chest, listening to the wind hammering the house. My mind raced. The voice had vanished, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and the oppressive cold. For hours, I watched the fireplace. I listened to every creak, every whisper of the wind. Occasionally, I thought I saw shadows flit across the walls. Occasionally, I heard faint, almost imperceptible humming, as if testing me. When the storm cleared, the sun rose, casting pale light into the room. Everything seemed normal again. Yet, I couldn't shake the unease. My home felt smaller, more fragile. I cleaned the fireplace, stacked logs again, wiped the soot from the floor. But when I looked closely, small traces remained, faint patterns of black smudges, like tiny footprints circling the hearth. Days passed. I tried to forget. I tried to live normally. I even went back to my usual evening routines. But the memory lingered, sharp and cold. And I noticed subtle signs. A log slightly moved, a candle flickering for no reason, faint ash along the rug. Most nights it was silent, too perfect. And I never sang along to Christmas carols inside my house again. Not since that night. Sometimes, when I drift off to sleep, I hear it again. A soft hum, a single note somewhere between music and whisper. I don't respond. I don't want to. I just lie still and listen. I haven't sung along to Christmas carols since. Not inside my house. And sometimes, the faint echo hums back. You know that feeling when something familiar seems wrong? When an object in your home moves on its own, just slightly, as if watching. I thought it was impossible too. But this is my story about an elf, a tiny thing that should have been harmless, and what it did when I was alone. Listen carefully. You might hear it too. I know it sounds insane, but the elf was not just moved. It was watching me. And it was not alone. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was just after dark on a quiet winter evening. My apartment was small, one bedroom, cozy, but minimal, just enough for me to survive comfortably. A faint string of holiday lights glowed across the living room window, casting soft shadows against the pale walls. Outside, the streets were quiet, the kind of silence that makes the smallest sounds inside feel amplified. I was curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, half watching a movie on my laptop when I saw it. The elf sat on the bookshelf near the window, in a place I was sure I had not put it. I remember frowning, tilting my head. "Huh," I said to myself. "I guess I moved you there yesterday." But I could not remember doing it. I had left the apartment in the morning, came back hours later, and there it was. Perfectly upright, tiny embroidered face turned slightly toward the string lights, its little bell dangling on the hat. I laughed nervously. "Okay, probably just sleep deprived," I muttered. That night, I went to bed with the elf still on the shelf, thinking little of it. I never imagined I would wake to find it somewhere else. The next morning, I noticed it again. The elf was perched on the edge of my kitchen counter, staring at me as I made coffee. I froze. My hands shook slightly. How had it moved? I lived alone. I double-checked the windows, the doors. Everything was locked, as always. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had sleepwalked. Maybe I had moved it myself without realizing. But as the days passed, the elf kept changing locations. Every morning, I found it somewhere new. On my pillow, sitting on the bathroom sink, peeking from behind a lamp. The movement was subtle, nothing violent or destructive, but it was unnerving. The apartment, once comforting, felt invaded. I started noticing tiny smudges where the elf had landed, faint scratches on the table, little marks on the carpet. I would follow these traces with my eyes, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. One night, I was halfway through a book when I heard a faint sliding sound from the living room. I froze. Footsteps. No, too light. My pulse quickened as I turned the lamp toward the sound. The elf was gone from the windowsill. I swear I saw a shadow slip across the floor, tiny and quick, before it vanished near the doorway. I do not know why I did not run. Fear, curiosity, disbelief, they all tangled together. I just watched the empty room trembling. Over the next week, the elf's behavior escalated. It was no longer just moving, it seemed aware of me. One night, I woke to the faintest jingling of the bell on its hat. My eyes snapped open. The string lights in the living room cast long, flickering shadows across the floor. My heart raced as I realized the elf was at the foot of my bed. I sat up. "No, no, this is impossible," I whispered, voice shaking. My hands clutched the sheets. I could feel the warmth of the apartment, the faint scent of pine from the little holiday decorations, and yet everything felt wrong. The elf had never been this close before. I began documenting everything. I set up my phone to record overnight, placed it near the bed. I watched the footage the next morning. My stomach twisted as I saw it moving, sliding across the carpet, hopping short distances, changing position without any human interference. No strings, no wires, no explanation. The paranoia grew. I could not focus on work. I jumped at shadows. Every noise, the refrigerator humming, the heater clicking, the soft groan of the building settling made my chest tighten. I questioned my own sanity. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I had lost my mind. But the footage did not lie. The elf moved by itself. I even spoke to my neighbor about it. She laughed politely, then hesitated, lowering her voice. "I do not want to scare you," she said, "but a few years ago, someone in this building had a similar problem. People thought it was stress, but it was never explained. They moved out very suddenly. Her words lodged in my chest like ice. Each night, I became more vigilant. I would check every corner, tap on the floor, whisper to myself. The elf always seemed one step ahead. On more than one occasion, I woke to find it on my pillow, staring at me with its stitched eyes, tiny feet facing me, as if waiting. I began hearing faint scratches at night, like the sound of something sliding across the floor, soft but deliberate. My footsteps echoed as I crept around the apartment, checking windows, doors, closets. Nothing. The apartment was sealed. I was alone. And yet I was not. I stopped trusting my memory. Could I have unconsciously moved it? Could I be sleepwalking? But the footage proved otherwise. The elf moved while I slept. Sometimes it paused mid-movement, as if watching me from across the room. I tried to confront it, speaking aloud. "What do you want?" The reply came only in movement. The next morning, the elf was on the kitchen counter, tilted toward me, as if acknowledging the question. I felt helpless, small, invaded. My own home, my sanctuary, had become a place I could not trust. Desperation overtook me. I tried everything, placing obstacles, blocking corners, even picking it up and putting it back in its original box. By morning, the elf was gone, somewhere new. I even thought of contacting authorities. But how do you explain an elf that moves on its own? They would laugh, or worse, think I was dangerous. Sleep became a battleground. I would wake to the soft jingling, the faint scratching on the floorboards. I would see shadows flit across the walls from the string lights. I stopped leaving drinks unattended, stopped leaving my laptop open, afraid the elf might. I do not know, interfere, watch, follow. One night, exhausted, I placed a hidden camera on the bookshelf near the window. I went to bed, heart hammering, praying for a peaceful night. But when I reviewed the footage in the morning, I froze. The elf moved across the room, sliding silently over the carpet, stopping midair as if floating, turning its head toward the camera before hopping onto the desk. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not possible. Nothing about this should be possible. I moved out the next week. I packed everything, leaving the apartment exactly as it had been, except for the elf, which I did not bring. I left it behind, hoping it would stay, or that it would stop. Even now, I cannot fully shake it. I no longer own elves. No decorations like that remain in my new apartment. Yet sometimes, when I am alone, late at night, I hear it. Tiny footsteps, a faint jingling bell. I do not know if it followed me, if it waits somewhere, or if I have simply lost my mind. But I hear it. Tiny, deliberate, impossible. And when I do, I am reminded that some things, some intrusions, cannot be explained, cannot be controlled, and cannot be ignored. I do not own any elves anymore, but sometimes I hear tiny footsteps when I am home alone. I froze every night, at 11:47. The moment was always the same. The house was quiet, the neighborhood asleep, the streetlights casting long shadows over the sidewalks. My apartment, or house rather, a modest suburban home with large windows facing the street, was cozy and warm. A single lamp glowed softly in the living room, throwing muted shadows across the furniture. Outside, the world was still. Inside, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through meaningless videos to pass the time. Then it would happen. Ping. AirDrop. I would lift the phone with a trembling hand, and there it would be. A photo of my living room. Sometimes the photo was innocuous, just the couch, the rug, the lamp, but always from an angle that implied knowledge of my exact position. I checked the windows, the front door, even my security cameras. Nothing. No movement outside. Nothing unusual in the neighborhood. And yet someone or something was watching. The first night, I tried to laugh it off. Probably a friend messing with me, I said aloud, voice tight. But I had told almost no one I was home alone. And besides, the next night the photo arrived again, this time a slightly different angle, closer to the couch where I had been sitting moments before. My chest tightened. Goosebumps rose on my arms. The rational part of me screamed it was impossible. But every sense, every instinct, told me that I was being observed. My name is William. I am careful, methodical, a person who values privacy and security. I do not go out much after dark, and I lock doors and windows meticulously. My home is my sanctuary, or it should have been. I first noticed the AirDrop around 11:47 at night, while I sat on the couch finishing a cup of tea. My phone chimed softly, the notification glowing in the dim light. I thought it was a misfire, maybe a software bug. I opened the photo. My stomach twisted. It was my living room, the lamp, the couch, me, sitting where I had been moments before. My heart began to hammer. I checked the front window. Nothing. The street was empty. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch, a wrong recipient. But when it happened again the next night, and the night after, the photos were not just of the room. They were closer, sharper angles that were impossible to capture from the street. One image even framed the corner of my bedroom window, partially obscured by the blinds. Someone was outside, or near, watching, waiting. I could not tell if it was a prank or something far more sinister. My phone was my only link to the outside world, yet even it seemed compromised. Each ping made my pulse race, my hands tremble. I began locking myself in rooms, leaving lights on, checking windows obsessively. Every creak of the floor, every distant noise from the street made me flinch. By the third night, I was no longer calm. I barely ate. I could not sleep properly. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every streetlight visible through my large windows seemed like it could harbor a figure, motionless, patient. The AirDrop continued, each photo increasingly invasive. One night, I found the camera focused on the couch cushions, where I had been resting my feet. Another night, it was centered on the lamp and my laptop. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I began setting up cameras, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was sending these images. Some of my cameras malfunctioned. Some simply did not record when the alert arrived. It was as if the presence outside knew how to avoid detection. I spoke to a neighbor during daylight hours. "Has anyone else reported strange AirDrop photos?" I asked. The neighbor frowned. "Not that I know of. Maybe someone is just hacking devices. You should call the police if it keeps happening." I tried. I showed them the photos. They took the report, nodded, but offered little assurance. "We will patrol the area," one officer said. But that night, the next ping came. The photo showed my living room, closer than before, and my couch again. But this time, there was something different. I could see the faint reflection of a figure in the darkened corner of the window. Just a silhouette, just a shape. I gasped, my pulse racing. I could not tell if it had been there the previous nights, or if it had arrived since sunset. I realized then that I could not hide, could not escape. Every angle of my home seemed exposed. Every window, every door, every corner could be observed. My home, my sanctuary, had become a stage, and I was its unwitting actor. By the fifth night, I was paranoid beyond reason. I barely left the living room. I would pace when the phone did not ping, anxious for the next signal. I could not focus on work, on meals, on anything other than the creeping sense of eyes watching me. Every ping of the phone now made me freeze, heart hammering. I would check the photo, turn on every light, scan the windows. Sometimes I imagined shadows flitting just outside, the silhouette of a person barely discernible through the blinds. Sometimes I wondered if the figure could see me as I observed it. I even started replaying each photo in my mind, trying to anticipate the angles, the timing. I became obsessed with patterns, with predicting the next intrusion. But each night, the photos defied logic. Each image was closer, more detailed, as if the observer was learning my habits, watching me move through my own home. It was not just fear, it was violation. I felt naked in my own living room, vulnerable, exposed. My technological security was useless. Locks, cameras, lights, none of it mattered. Someone was there. They could see me, and I could not stop them. One night, I decided to confront the situation. I placed a motion-activated camera outside, at the edge of my property, pointing toward the street and windows. I left it on, waited, phone in hand, every muscle tense. At 11:47, the familiar ping sounded. AirDrop. My fingers shook as I opened the photo. This time, it was of my bedroom window. My heart froze. The camera outside, I hoped, would finally provide evidence. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. A figure, dark, partially hidden behind a tree at the property line, moved slowly and deliberately. The camera caught no face, no identifying details, only the silhouette inching along, remaining just out of full view. Police came. They scoured the property, checked the surrounding area. No footprints, no forced entry, no signs of the figure. Just snow, quiet streets, and a man left shaken and unprotected. I installed stronger locks, reinforced blinds, attempted to return to normal routines. But the fear lingered. That night, the AirDrop pinged again. My hands shook as I opened the photo. This time, the image showed my bedroom, my bed, my side table, and a shadowed form just beyond the foot of the bed. I had not left the room that night. I had been asleep when the photo was taken. The next morning, my AirDrop history confirmed my worst fears. Photos from inside my bedroom, captured while I slept. No evidence remained outside. No identification. Only the undeniable sense of someone watching, knowing, waiting. I have moved, changed devices, increased security, and yet the unease never fully leaves. The feeling of eyes on me, of being observed without trace or reason, lingers. I do not know who or what was outside those windows, but I know it was patient, deliberate, and it was watching me. And sometimes, at night, I still hear the faint ping of an AirDrop notification that should not exist. I never meant to stay alone for the winter. My plan had been simple. Spend a few quiet months in my late aunt's old house, sort through her belongings, and then sell the place before spring thawed the woods and made the property less claustrophobic. The house stood on the far outskirts of town, where the roads narrowed and the trees leaned inward, skeletal in winter, their branches stiff and gray against a silver sky. I arrived with a trunk full of sweaters, books, and the kind of naive confidence that isolation brings. The house, small and aging, welcomed me with a faint creak of its thin roof and a cold draft that seeped through the hallway as if the place exhaled slowly, watching me. My aunt had lived simply. Bare floors, sparse furniture, and long, quiet days. I imagined I could adapt. I liked my solitude, or at least, I believed I did. My first week passed peacefully. I woke early each morning, brewed tea in the tiny kitchen with its chipped counters, and spent hours sorting dusty boxes from old closets. At night, I lit a single lamp in the living room and read by its tired glow while the wind outside hissed against the walls. The woods wrapped around the house like a dark, frozen cocoon. I could hear the occasional clink of ice breaking on tree bark, the groan of branches stiff under frost, and the distant cry of something animal, though muffled by snow. I slept lightly each night, not because I was afraid, but because the house itself never properly slept. The roof, old and thin, expanded and contracted with every shift in temperature. It popped, cracked, and uttered soft groans that I learned to accept as normal. At the time, I believed I could distinguish the natural sounds of a house settling from anything else. I learned later how foolish that belief was. The first strange thing happened on the 10th night. Snow had fallen heavily all afternoon. A slow, thick curtain that piled along the roof and pressed icy weight into its boards. After hours of sorting through my aunt's belongings, I crawled into bed exhausted. The darkness felt deeper than usual, heavy, with the suffocating silence of a blizzard still raging outside. I drifted close to sleep when I heard it. A single, heavy footstep on the roof. Not the casual pop of ice, not the skitter of broken branches. A deliberate step. I lifted my head from the pillow. The air felt colder, as if something drew heat upward. I held my breath and listened. Another step, slow, weighty. Then another, closer to the center of the roof. I whispered to myself that it had to be an animal, though I could not imagine what animal would climb onto the roof in a storm. The roof creaked again, but this time it was different, more like a response to the pressure of something moving, something pacing. The house was small. The sound was close enough that I could trace its progress from one end of the roof toward the other. Each step made a soft thump, muffled by snow, but unmistakably intentional. I waited for the steps to fade, but they did not. They continued long after I expected them to stop. The next morning, I avoided acknowledging what I had heard. Denial is a warm blanket, and I wrapped myself tightly in it. I told myself that the storm had amplified ordinary noises. I convinced myself that I had been half asleep, exhausted, imagining things. But throughout the day, I could not shake the sense that something had changed. The house felt colder in unusual ways. There were patches of chill that formed directly beneath where the footsteps had been. When I stood in the hallway, I could feel a faint draft descending from the ceiling, though no vent existed there. I refused to dwell on it. I buried myself in chores, cleaning out the pantry, sweeping the floors, and sorting through my aunt's notebooks. She had kept dozens, mostly filled with grocery lists, odd sketches of birds, and half-finished recipes. Nothing unsettling. Nothing that pointed toward anything strange. When night came, I drank hot tea and told myself I would sleep deeply. Exhaustion, I reasoned, would be my cure. That was when I heard the steps again. This time I ignored them. I pressed the pillow over my ears, closed my eyes, and pretended that they were not there. I refused to acknowledge the slow, deliberate pacing above me. I refused to acknowledge the way the darkness seemed to deepen each time the footsteps slowed. I refused to admit that something felt wrong, but refusal could only delay what was coming. On the 12th day, the snow eased long enough for my neighbor Margot to stop by. She was a sturdy older woman with a round face and sharp eyes that never seemed to miss anything. She owned the closest neighboring property, though close meant almost an hour's walk away when the roads were buried. She delivered extra firewood and a loaf of bread. When she stepped inside, she frowned, rubbing her hands briskly against her sleeves. "This house is colder than it should be," she murmured. "Your aunt used to complain about drafts. If you hear things at night, do not be surprised." My heart skipped. "What kind of things?" She hesitated, as though deciding how much to say. "Well, houses like this make noises in winter. The roof creaks, the ice shifts. But your aunt used to swear someone walked across her roof." I told her it was imagination. Too much time alone can play tricks on a person. I swallowed hard. Did she ever see anything or find signs? Margot shook her head. She claimed she saw tracks once, but they melted before I could take a look. I felt a coldness deeper than the draft creep through me. Margot left before dusk, leaving a slip of unease in the air. As she stepped off the porch, she turned back with a solemn expression. "If you hear anything strange, stay inside and keep the doors locked. Winter brings out desperate animals." Animals. I wished I could believe that fully. That night, I made a choice. Instead of hiding in bed, I sat in the living room in darkness, wrapped in a blanket, listening. Wind hissed against the house. The gutters rattled faintly under the weight of ice. Shadows pooled under the furniture, long and crooked, stretching like fingers. For hours, nothing unusual happened. I began to think I had imagined everything. I was on the verge of going to bed when I felt it. A vibration, a shift in the ceiling, then a step, another, slow, heavy, intentional. My breath caught. I rose quietly and stepped beneath the area of ceiling where the sound centered. A faint cold seeped downward, almost like breath or the absence of breath. I pressed my palm to the plaster. It felt unnaturally chilled. "What are you?" I whispered. There was no answer, but the footsteps changed direction, almost as if responding. I should have returned to bed. Instead, I made a decision that sealed my fate for the days that followed. I stayed right where I was and listened. The footsteps came every night. Sometimes they were slow and distant. Other times they circled above me as though whatever walked there grew restless. On one night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Breathing. A faint, irregular inhalation from the roof above, like something exhausted or starved. I checked outside the next morning. No tracks. The snow was untouched. The roof looked pristine, undisturbed except for the natural settling of snow. I tried calling the police once, hoping they would reassure me. They said that without visible tracks or signs of a break-in, there was little they could do. Wildlife, they explained, behaved strangely in winter. They advised me to install a camera. I did. I strapped a small battery-operated camera to a tree with a clear view of the roof. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing. Hours of still, unwavering snow and a silent roof. I doubted myself. Was I losing my grip on reality? Sleep deprivation began thinning my thoughts. my sense of time warped. I started drinking extra coffee just to stay alert, but the more exhausted I became, the more vivid the footsteps sounded. One night, the steps came so close that I felt the ceiling tremble above my bed. I forced myself to remain still, though my heart pounded so loudly I thought whatever lingered above might hear. Then the footsteps stopped, directly above me. A long silence followed, heavy, suffocating. Then the faintest exhale, something breathing in the cold darkness, inches above my head. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. By the 15th night, my nerves frayed dangerously. I needed answers. I needed to know what walked on the roof. Something in me believed that if I learned the truth, the haunting might stop, or at least become manageable. So I went to the attic. The attic was a narrow, triangular space filled with old trunks and forgotten winter coats. The ceiling beams stretched low, dust clinging to every surface. A pale line of frost glittered along the edge of the roof boards, as though something cold pressed against them from above. I climbed on a box and pressed my ear to the roof. The surface felt frigid, even though the day had not been unusually cold. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then something scraped against the roof. Not a step, but a drag, as though something moved its weight or claws, or something else across the frozen boards. The sound was slow, hesitant. I backed away, heart hammering. The attic felt smaller than before, the air thinner. I descended quickly and shut the attic door, pressing my back against it. I realized then that the thing above was not simply walking. It was searching. The 20th night broke me. The wind had died completely, leaving the world outside silent. Even the woods seemed to hold their breath. I sat in bed with a lamp on the nightstand, watching shadows gather along the ceiling. The silence pressed against my ears. Then the footsteps resumed. This time they were faster, more frantic. The whole house shuddered with their weight. The roof groaned dangerously, as though one more step might send it collapsing inward. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound vibrated through the walls and floor. A dark shape passed over the ceiling, blocking the meager light from the lamp. I swore I saw a silhouette through the plaster, a hunched form, elongated, impossibly thin. The breathing grew louder, raspy and strained. Then something pressed down, making the ceiling bow slightly above me. "Stop," I whispered, though the word barely escaped my throat. The pressure increased. A faint crack formed in the ceiling, and a thin line of icy powder sifted down onto my blankets. I scrambled off the bed just as the footsteps halted abruptly. Silence swallowed the house. Then a single knock sounded from the roof. Not a footstep, a knock, like a command or a question. I fled the room and spent the rest of the night in the living room, shaking. The next morning, desperate for logic, I checked the roof again. This time, I found something. Footprints, large, distinct impressions in the snow, each shaped vaguely like a human foot, but stretched unnaturally long, with a strange narrowing at the heel. They led across the roof from one end to the other, but there were no prints leading up to the roof, none from the ground, none from the trees, just the ones pacing back and forth, and then stopping right above my bedroom. I photographed them with trembling hands. I finally had proof that something real walked there, something that defied explanation. The knowledge grounded me, even as it terrified me. I was not imagining things. I was not losing my mind. Something existed there, and it knew where I slept. I called the police again. They arrived later that afternoon, examined the footprints, and took careful notes. One officer remarked quietly that the prints looked almost too large for any known local animal. Another wondered how they had not been disturbed by wind. They left without answers. I knew I could not stay in the house. I packed a few bags and planned to leave the next day when the snowplows cleared the road. I slept on the living room floor that night, hoping that the footsteps would not follow me there. But they did. At one point in the early hours, the pacing resumed. Slower this time, almost thoughtful. The house settled uneasily under the weight. I pulled my blankets to my chin and stared at the ceiling as something paused directly above me. The breathing sounded again. Cold sifted downward, as though whatever lingered there drew the warmth of the house into itself. I stayed awake until dawn. Morning finally came, pale and colorless. The officers returned to take one last look at the prints, but overnight, new snow had fallen lightly, blurring them. They apologized, shrugged helplessly, and left me alone again. I planned to drive into town and stay there for the remainder of the week, but the road had iced over. The car would not make it down the sloped driveway safely. I decided to stay one more night and leave at first light. That evening, the house felt too quiet. Even the ordinary groans had ceased. The silence felt wrong, heavy in a different way than before. I settled in the living room again, wrapped in blankets beside the dying remains of a fire. Hours passed without a single sound. It should have calmed me. It did the opposite. Just before dawn, when the darkness began to thin, I heard it. A single step, just one, directly above me. Not pacing, not breathing, not searching, just a reminder that it was still there, and that it knew I was leaving. I left the house as soon as the sky lightened and the roads became passable. I drove into town shaking, unable to look back at the roof. The neighbors helped me return only to collect essential belongings. They found fresh footprints on the roof, larger than before, but once again, none leading away. An animal expert examined the prints and concluded that no known creature in the region could have made them. I did not wait for further explanations. I moved out within the week. I have not returned since. Sometimes, though, when I lie awake at night in my new apartment, far from the woods and the winter wind. I imagine I hear a faint step above me, just one, as though whatever walked on that roof in the dead of winter followed me, or never really left. It started on a night colder than usual. The wind rattled the windows, shaking the thin curtains in my living room like invisible fingers trying to reach in. I had always prided myself on my little sanctuary, my home, my space. But that December, something seemed to settle in the shadows. The kind of presence you feel before you see it. I am Susan, and I do not use my basement. It has always been cluttered with boxes of forgotten items, faded photo albums, and furniture no longer needed. Yet, every night in December, precisely at 12:33 a.m., the basement light clicked on. Not flickered, not hummed or glowed. It clicked on, as if acknowledging a presence waiting in the darkness. At first, I told myself it was faulty wiring, or maybe the stormy weather had created a short circuit. My friend, David, always practical, laughed when I mentioned it. Old houses are quirky, he said. My sister, Laura, suggested that maybe I was dreaming. Susan, it's probably your imagination running wild because it's December, she said, sipping her tea and smiling that calm, soothing smile that always makes me doubt my own fears. But on the fourth night, curiosity defeated caution. I stayed awake, hiding under my blanket with the sound of the clock ticking like a countdown to something inevitable. At 12:33 a.m., there was the click. And then, faintly at first, footsteps creaking up the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate, echoing in the darkened hallway outside my bedroom. I froze. My heartbeat drummed in my ears louder than the wind outside. I wanted to call for help, but my voice felt locked inside my throat. I reached for my phone, only to realize I had left it downstairs charging. Something or someone was on the stairs. I could hear the shifting of weight on the wooden steps, the gentle scrape, as if a body familiar with the house moved in rhythm with it. Then a pause. I dared to look through the sliver of my bedroom door. Nothing. Empty hallway. But the basement light glowed, stark and unforgiving. Days before, I had noticed subtle changes in the house. The smell of damp earth lingering longer than it should after rain. The faint whisper of air conditioning in rooms where I had never installed it. The feeling of being watched, not from behind, but from beneath, as if the floor itself had eyes. I began to research the history of my home. Built in the 1950s, my house had been purchased by a couple, the Mortons, who vanished without a trace in the early 70s. The neighbors whispered about debts and secret rituals, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. The police closed the case, and my house was sold to me decades later. But something remained. That night, I could not sleep. I had lit candles in my bedroom and tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the basement door. The light was off for most of the day, And then it clicked on again. Exactly 12:33 a.m. I remember sitting on my bed, trembling, wondering if I had imagined the footsteps before. But tonight, I decided to act. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from my nightstand, its weight oddly reassuring. I stepped quietly to the basement door, heart in my throat, and opened it just enough to shine the light down the stairs. The basement was empty. Boxes lined the walls, dust motes dancing in the beam of light. But I saw something strange, a shadow moving, just at the corner of my vision. I turned, and nothing was there. I went down slowly, counting each step. Each creak of the wooden stairs felt amplified in the oppressive darkness. At the bottom, the air was colder than anywhere else in the house. I shined the light over the clutter, and my eyes fell on an old trunk I had never noticed before. It was black, with scratches that looked like claw marks. The lock was old, rusted, yet somehow it clicked open as I approached. Inside, I found dozens of photographs. All of them were of the house, and all of them featured people I did not recognize, standing in the same hallway where the basement light now flickered every night. In each photo, a shadow lingered at the bottom of the stairs, just out of reach of the camera. I screamed. The sound echoed off the bare walls, bouncing back at me like a warning. And then, from the staircase behind me, I heard the creak of steps again. Slowly, deliberately. My skin crawled. I spun around, flashlight shaking, but nothing was there. Days passed, and the visits continued. Every night at 12:33, the light clicked on, and the footsteps came. I started sleeping in my living room, away from the basement door. Laura insisted I stay with her, but something in me needed to confront it. I could not run anymore. On December 18th, I decided to record the events. I set up a camera facing the basement stairs and waited. The clock ticked closer to 12:33. I held my breath. Click. The light came on. Footsteps. I froze. Then, the sound of whispering, low, unintelligible, yet unmistakably human. I could feel its gaze as I watched the video later. On the footage, a figure slowly ascended the stairs, but its face was blurred, shifting, never settling. It moved with a fluidity that was almost human, yet undeniably not. And when it reached the top, it turned toward the camera. Its eyes, or what I could make out of them, glowed faintly, like embers smoldering in the dark. I sought help. Paranormal experts, electricians, even a medium named Helena, who claimed she could communicate with the residual energy in houses. Helena told me something that still haunts me. Some places do not forget. They hold onto what they have lost. And the Mortons, Susan, did not leave your basement. They are still waiting for someone to see them, to feel them, to acknowledge them. The light is their calling card. Weeks went by. I tried reasoning with it, talking aloud in the basement, leaving small offerings, candles, old coins, a cup of water. The footsteps changed. They no longer came directly after the light clicked on. They circled the house. Sometimes I could feel them above me in my bedroom, pacing in the hallway. December 30th arrived. The night was silent, heavier than usual. I stayed in my basement, armed with nothing but a candle and the determination to face whatever haunted me. 12:33 came. The light clicked on. Footsteps began, but instead of moving up the stairs, they stopped at the bottom, as if waiting for me to approach. I called out, "Who are you?" Silence, then a whisper, "Susan." I froze. That was my name, not spoken by anyone alive, not by anyone in the house. The shadows lengthened. The air grew icy, and I saw them, two figures, transparent yet distinct. A man and a woman holding hands, their eyes hollow but pleading. The Mortons. I did not scream. I felt a strange calm. I realized they were not here to hurt me. They were trapped, unable to move on because no one remembered them. They wanted acknowledgement, a witness. I whispered, "I see you. I remember you." The figures smiled faintly, and then, slowly, they began to fade. The light clicked off. The basement was empty. The oppressive presence lifted. I never used the basement again in December, but I no longer feared it. Sometimes I leave a candle on the stairs, just in case. And at night, when the wind rattles the windows, I imagine them watching, waiting for someone to see, someone to remember.
As always, thanks for listening. Sleep tight, shadows.